session, whether you stay for 5 minutes, the full 60, or if you just couldn't make it today. Hello, future viewers. Everybody that registered is going to get an email in about 1 to 2 business days, and that'll have a link to where you can rewatch this recording. So then the other thing I want to share with you is that if you are at all curious about more about Hopin, or especially any of the other events that Power to Fly has going on, make sure that you check us out on social. We are at Power to Fly on 5 different social channels. So we have we actually have 2 YouTube channels, a main and then our Chat and Learn series, which is where this video will eventually be hosted. We are on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook as well. So if you follow us on any of those platforms, you can get great information about upcoming events, our blog posts, resources that we have for you in terms of job hunting and upskilling and all kinds of really great stuff, as well as community building events too. So please feel free to subscribe to those social channels. And as I very much recommend you subscribe to our YouTube channel for Chat and Learns, so that way you don't have to worry about missing out on one of these great events like today. If you want to go to the next screen. So obviously, Hopin is our partner for today's event, and they are hiring at the moment. So what I want to do is I'm going to share a link with y'all in the chat thread here in just a moment, to where you can check out Hopin's company page on powertofly.com. Now, once you're there, there's going to be a couple different things to see. There's the page will look like what you're looking at here. In the upper right-hand corner of the page will be a big pink button that says follow. That is a really good tool for you, and I highly recommend you click that. Both if you are interested in Hopin and anticipate filling out, a job application with them anytime soon, or even if you're not actively looking, but like Hopin is an interesting company for you and you want to make sure they stay on your radar, click that follow button. What it's going to do is it's going to put you on Hopin's radar. It's going to let them know that you are interested in their company even before you fill out an application. And it's also going to work like your friend at the company that keeps you on, or keeps them on your radar. So it'll tell you when they post new roles. So it's a really great way to make sure that you stay up to date on some of the companies you're looking at. You can follow and unfollow as many times as you like and as many companies as you like on Power to Fly. But obviously, we very much recommend that you check out Hopin, because as you're going to find out, this is an amazing company, and definitely a place that you'll want to check out some of their openings. So like I said, I will share that link in the chat here in just a moment once I get my stuff figured out here. So the next thing, if you want to hop to the next page, I'm really excited to introduce you to our speakers. So first up, we have Rachel Batchelor. Rachel is Hopin's recruitment, branding, and events manager. She works across teams to build talent, branding, and plan recruiting events, as well as work with external organizations on sponsorship opportunities. In her free time, she loves biking, paddleboarding, and lounging in a pool. She's also celebrating her 1-year anniversary coming up. So hopefully y'all will find a lot of great points where you can relate to Rachel. Joining Rachel, if you'd like to skip to the next slide, is Brinley Bruton. Brinley is one of my favorite people because she used to work for Power to Fly, and now she is part of the amazing team at Hopin. Brinley is a recruiter for the go-to-market side of Hopin's business. And she started her career in education, but she's since held a variety of roles at startups across several different industries before pivoting her career into recruiting. Brinley loves reading, cooking, road tripping, and leaning into a completely remote work lifestyle. I think you've lived in, 2 different countries just over the course of the pandemic?
Yes, for better or for worse.
Yeah, girls had some fun, a lot of adventures. So I'm really excited for you guys to get to know Brinley a little bit more as well. So if you want to skip to the next slide. The last thing I want to go over before we jump into our the Q&A portion, if we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. So these are some of the principal themes for today's conversation. Oops, sorry, back one. That's my bad. I'm giving you bad information.
Hold on 1 second.
Take your time. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is some of the principal themes that we're going to try and go over on today's conversation. Now, we formed these both from conversations with Brinley and Rachel prior to today's session, as well as by looking at the questions that y'all submitted during the registration step for today's chat. So what we've tried to do, we gathered all those questions, we tried to arrange them in a conversational format. And like I said, these are what we're going to try and go over today. However, if you are joining us and you took time out of your day to spend with Power to Fly and Hopin, we want to make sure that that time is well worth it. So whether you submitted a question previously, or even if all you have is a question that comes to you during today's session, please feel free to share it. Let us know, throw it into the questions box, especially if you are worried that maybe we're not going to get to your question before time runs out. It's definitely a good way, raising your question now or during the live session is the best way to make sure it gets answered. And like I said, we're going to try and hit on some of these topics, but you all should feel free to really drive today's conversation. So if there's an area that we're talking about that you want to go more in depth on, please let us know. We really want to, hear from you and make sure that these events are worthwhile to you. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can negotiate compensation and perks within like the startup life. We're going to talk about some of the questions you can ask to make sure that that company is a good fit for you. We're going to discuss a little bit more about your resume and ways that you can stand out in the application process, as well as some of the skills you really need to thrive in a startup environment. So we don't need to share the screen anymore because we're going to try and make things a little more conversational with Brinley and Rachel and I. But one of the things I wanted to start with, because this is a question that got asked a lot, what are some good questions that you can ask during an interview to help reveal potential red flags with a company? I know that when I was first applying to startups, my parents, as well as like a lot of like older friends that I had, were like, okay, but like where are they headquartered, and like how do they get their funding, and like questions that I've never had to ask before or been asked, like suggested that I ask before. When it comes to interviewing. So what are some of the questions that you think are really key to understanding this facet of a prospective company?
Yeah, I would say one of my biggest things is like figuring out what is important to you. What do you value in a company, and what do you value in a workspace, and asking questions around that. So for me, I love autonomy. And so I'm going to be asking, people who I'm interviewing it with, how that manager is, what's their work style. And it tells you a lot, right? And their response, if they also work for this manager, so that you can really get a feel of what your day-to-day is actually going to be like. So that's a big one for me. And kind of just like, I think in general, questions should be more around like, here's what you're going to be interacting with the most. Here's what your day-to-day is going to look like. But that would be my suggestion, is whatever you value in a company, asking lots of questions around that.
Great. Brinley, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
I do. Yeah, I totally agree with Rachel, and in that you need to figure out what it is that's important to you and kind of ask those questions. But I also think a consideration for many people when joining a startup is how like viable is this option? Like, is this startup going to be here in a year? Are they actually doing well? Is it a successful business? So when I was interviewing for startups, I usually ask questions like what the runway is like, or I do my research on like funding rounds. And I ask questions about, what that has been, and, kind of what that's been going towards, and what their plans are in the future. So just getting a sense of, is this a place that's going to be around and that's successful and is going to help me grow as well?
Yeah, that's excellent. And I think you're right. That's a lot of the same questions that I asked when I looked at Power to Fly, because that was my first ever time in both a remote role as well as a startup. So yeah, I think you guys have covered a lot of really good points here. Okay, the only other thing, there we go, sorry. The only other thing I would have to add to that is I asked about things like turnover, just because burnout is very real within the startup community and within kind of the startup ecosystem. So that way I could not only get an idea for this company and maybe how quickly I would be getting all new team members, but also so I could kind of check within the recruiting field to see if that was, if the answer they gave me was pretty on the nose as far as turnover within the industry in general, because I had never worked in recruiting before I joined Powerfly. So yeah, I absolutely love that. Okay, so one of the other questions we get asked a lot, this person said, a lot of startups seem to require previous experience within the startup environment. Are there any ways to overcome this obstacle or to convince employers that you have the applicable experience and skills?
Do you want to start, Brinley?
Sure. This is a hard one because I think it's very true. A lot of startups, and in many cases, Hopin, we really look for people that can bring kind of their skills from the startup world already. However, I would say that ultimately, at least at Hopin, we're really looking for someone who can first and foremost align with our values. And values alignment is huge for us. And then secondly is, do you have the skills to be successful in the role? So I think that those are the two most important things. So if you don't have startup experience, I would take that piece of advice and really kind of figure out how, actually list out your transferable skills, reflect on kind of successes and wins and learning opportunities that you've had in your previous roles, even if they weren't in a startup. And then you can really use all of that reflection by, tailoring your resume to the job that you're applying to, writing a cover letter about how certain moments or certain projects you've worked to really apply to the role. So again, I think it's not a deal breaker that if you're trying to get into a startup that you've never worked in a startup before. And I'll just repeat, because especially from Hopin's perspective, we want you to be able to be successful here, but we also just want you to be a good person that aligns with our values. So I think that's the most important thing.
And I would add to that, I think that transferable skills are huge because, my background is actually in nonprofit. And so I worked in nonprofit for years and years and years and decided to transition into the tech world and startup world. And I will say I received 1,000 rejections. But I think the thing was I never self-rejected. And I think that's really important to never self-reject, because eventually somebody did see the transferable skills, right? And they did take a chance on it. And I think that having those transferable skills are important. And I think it gives variety to the company and different perspectives coming from other industries as well. So my biggest piece of advice is to never self-reject. And just try, as much as you can to find a company that aligns with your values as well. And really just making those transferable skills really obvious on your resume, cover letter, things like that.
I can't agree with both of you strongly enough. I think, right, it's also something that we try and talk about when it comes to diversity as well, is that you're not really looking for a culture fit, because that leads to, kind of a very homogenous looking landscape within within your teams and your org as a whole. But if you look at it in terms of where they might have a culture gap or a skills gap that you have, Rachel, your point about not, kind of not disqualifying yourself is huge. Don't assume that they're going to have problems with the fact that you don't have X, Y, and Z skills. Point out and highlight the parts that make you such a great, would make you such a great fit, or would help you, your skills that would help them do things better or differently than they're doing them currently. So we're talking a lot about the skills. I know we didn't have this till further down in the questions list, but I do want to touch briefly on some of those applicable skills or transferable skills. So what skills do you think that an ideal candidate should have to work in a tech startup?
I can take this one too, or first. I think what Rachel said earlier about autonomy is a really good one, especially now that many companies are remote and are going to continue to be remote, even when the pandemic hopefully subsides at some point in time. We at Hopin are super collaborative as an entire team, as an entire company, but we don't micromanage you. And we feel really strongly that we want everyone to take ownership over what they're doing. So a really good balance of that autonomy, but also being collaborative and being open to new ideas, and also bringing your own new perspective and diverse perspective to what you're doing. So that's what I would say to that.
Yeah, that's autonomy and just kind of being able to have like flexibility, rolling with the punches, in startups, things change so quickly, priorities shift, everything is moving. There's a little ambiguity in startups, but if you like kind of working through problem solving and, creating something from nothing and having that, like being able to hone in that skill, it's really fun. So I would say just being able to have flexibility, rolling with the punches, and that would be mine 2 cents.
I think those are all great points. We are getting a lot of people in the questions field or in the chat, talking about these highlightable, the transferable skills and how to highlight them and, things like that. And one of the things I do want to add to what y'all are saying is, especially when it comes to not having prior startup or prior remote work experience, one of the things that worked for me was being able to talk about my time management skills, my ability to pivot, having curiosity for wanting, if you have a question and there's nobody that can really answer it, or there's not a subject matter expert, going out and finding a solution for something or trying things out is huge, especially, and it's huge at Power to Fly, but I do think it's huge everywhere. And then the other thing was talking about anytime that you've had to either manage yourself or manage, I worked in a satellite capacity, so I was in a different part of the building than my team, but still on site. So that was a good thing to highlight and just mark out, hey, this, I've been on my own before in a loosely supervised capacity. So this is where I have, great skills there. Plus communication, especially in in a remote environment or in a startup, that communication happens quickly, and you need to be able to clearly express yourself, or at least have the skills to work through, not necessarily conflict, but just working with other people, making sure that you all are on the same page. We did have a great question that came in the chat. They wanted to, Patch Epstein had asked, let's see, should transferable skills be on your resume or your cover letter, or both? I have an opinion on this, but I'm really eager to see what each of you has to say. Rachel, do you want to start?
Sure. So I would definitely say adding it to your cover letter is great. There is actually a method if you want to try out a new type of cover letter, where you basically list the qualifications of the role on one side of a chart and different projects and things that you've done that highlight how your skills are transferable with the qualifications of the role. That one works really well. It catches the eye because it's not just blocks of text. It's actually kind of, here's a chart, here's a summary of how I relate. And I would also say in your resume, kind of tying in different things. What's the wording in their job description? What are the metrics that they are using to measure success? And actually being able to figure out rewording your resume to tie in how your skills relate and transfer to that. And anything I would say too with startups, people love numbers. Anytime you can say you did something, instead of saying you improved a process, what percentage did you help something go quicker, or any numbers that you can throw out, startups love that. So anytime you can relate that, it's always good.
Yeah, I totally agree with Rachel. And I think I'd even take it a step further to say that if you are applying to a role where you really do need to highlight your transferable skills, it's not like a one-to-one match, so to say. I think a cover letter is great because it, as Rachel said, it tells kind of the story of how those skills apply. And so maybe, I don't know if I should say this if my boss is listening. As a candidate, I hate cover letters, but as a recruiter, I actually love them because at least at Hopin, we look at every single resume. We read every single cover letter, and I've come across resumes where I hesitate about maybe why this person applied or how their experience applies to the role, and then I see they have a cover letter that really brings to light what they're looking to do and why they've applied and the skills that they have that are relevant to the role. And I've ended up interviewing with them before, so I think it really does make a difference.
agree. And I think, Brinley, we have very similar beliefs on this. One of the things that we hear tons about, and it's very different from when I was being taught how to do a resume, but it's the idea that you focus on your accomplishments, as well as what Rachel said, focus on those metrics. So if you can say, like, I did, improved efficiency 40% in this area, or we were able to, take on this much extra work because we streamlined this, this workflow or whatever. That is a really big thing to point to. Rachel's point about echoing the language that's being used in the job description is huge as well. And then one of the things I like to point out to people is that, like, your profile, like your LinkedIn profile or something, should be like the teaser trailer to your movie, right? That's going to be like, the thing that is supposed to start getting people interested in listening to you. Your cover letter is the trailer, and then your resume is the movie. So the cover, like, you in that trailer, you want to make sure that you are either addressing addressing if you're a career pivoter, and here's how the skills you develop there really would suit, these tasks that are in the job description, or, the way your vision and your values align with the company's values. That's where you can really make those connections in ways that you don't want to be quite so long-winded in a resume form. So I absolutely love those ideas from both of you. Okay, so when we're talking about, the idea of you've gone through your interview and you're into the point of either negotiating salary, that kind of thing, before you've, taken the job and onboarded. We had a lot of people that wrote in wondering about, like, kind of what the difference is between a startup and a corporate environment. And one of the big ways they highlighted was how to understand some of the perks, like, stock options, equity, what other benefits that you should consider either asking about or asking for if you are new to the startup world. So what kind of, what's your opinion on this? Brinley, do you want to start, or Rachel, would you like to?
I can start. So yeah, this is a great question. And I am of the belief that companies should be generous with their benefits. We're working very hard for these organizations. We're putting in a lot of time. And so something that I would always look for is, kind of basic healthcare coverage for myself. Of course, a competitive salary, equity, and, remote work. That's been really important to me since even before the pandemic. And so I think with startups, where you're going to have the most negotiating power is, with the salary and with the equity. Now, I've never worked for a publicly owned company. I've always worked for startups that are still in startup phase. They haven't gone public. So I personally can't speak to what it's like maybe joining a corporation where you get equity that you can trade someday already. But there is something to pay attention to is if your company's offering you RSUs, restricted stock units, or ISOs, incentivized stock options, and kind of just the different tax implications of each of those, what it means, how often they vest, if you're going to have to purchase those options eventually, like you would with ISOs and things like that. I also want to say that all of these benefits and perks, if you get to the offer stage with a company, I really encourage people to be transparent throughout the entire recruiting process, because that makes for probably a more straightforward offer once you get to that stage. And it also just helps the recruiter and the company value you ultimately. If you aren't super forthcoming with how much necessarily you need to be making, or how much you want to be making, or where you need to be, it can get tricky for us as recruiters to really feel like we're gonna give you a competitive offer. So I just like to give that advice around being transparent with your recruiter, because ultimately we're trying to get you to work for us, as much as maybe you're trying to work for our company.
Really good point, Brinley. Thank you. Rachel, you had
Yeah. I would say in general, anytime you're negotiating with salary, with equity. Typically, earlier startups, the earlier they are going to give you more equity, right? So if you want to know based on where their series is, check out a place like TechCrunch, and you can see exactly what series they're in, and know exactly how much you should be asking for. Should you be negotiating for more equity? Typically, if they're earlier, you can negotiate for more equity. And the later they get on, you can negotiate salary or equity. But I would say in general, to counter with one of those and maybe pick what's your favorite. Do you believe in the company? Do you believe in the success of the company and you want more equity? Go that way. Would you rather have a bigger paycheck? Go that way. But I would say to pick one and counter with one of those things. What do you think, Brinley?
I totally agree with you. I think too, kind of thinking about what I said earlier, it's also really appropriate in the spirit of being transparent to ask your recruiter, like, what's the range that we're looking at here? What does the compensation package look like? Asking those questions of your recruiter.
So sorry, y'all. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
It looks like I got kicked off of the internet here, so I'm so sorry. I'm looking to see if we can get.
Oh,
we lost her again. But anyways, yes. Just was saying, ask those questions of your recruiter as well. The more transparent the conversation can be, the better, in my opinion. We're not trying to swindle anyone. We want to make this a great process for you and ultimately get you to a competitive offer stage.
Yeah. And if you have any questions around equity or anything like that, definitely ask your recruiter, and they're happy to explain it. And one of the other things that I look for in terms of benefits, I was just thinking about this, is surprisingly parental leave. And the reason I think about that is not because I am a parent or plan to.
Can y'all see and hear me? I can't hear anybody, so I'm hoping.
We can.
Hoping y'all can see me. I'm so sorry.
It's just parental leave, only because even if you're not a parent or planning to be anytime soon, it still tells you a lot about a company, in my opinion, of like how well they take care of their employees.
Not agree more, especially for those of us that work in the United States. That can be hard to come by and definitely competitive in terms of offering generous parental leave. So I definitely agree with you, Rachel.
Cool. I hope we can get Megan back, but let's see. So here's a good question, Brinley. I'll just read one out.
Okay.
Are startups only for young, hungry people? I worry that since I'm squarely in the middle age range, I won't be considered energetic enough for startup roles. I'll let you take it.
Sure. I would definitely say, can you hear us, Meg?
Yes, I'm so sorry. I just had like a huge panic attack because I kept getting in and I couldn't hear or see either of you. And I was like, well, I don't know if they can hear or see me, but
yeah.
We can.
Thank you, y'all. I'm so sorry. Okay.
Oh my gosh, no
I
worries.
actually just moved us on to a question.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so what are we covering now?
Startups are just for young, hungry people.
Yeah, I hear this a lot. I hear this question a lot. So have we covered this, or are you still in your answer portion?
Yeah, we haven't covered it.
Okay.
Just about to answer. Thanks for hanging in, everybody, with the
Thank you.
with the technical difficulties. So I would definitely say that startups are not just for the young and the hungry. We at Hopin have age diversity pretty much across the organization. And not only is that an important part of diversity, just people from different backgrounds and different ages, but it's also just that, we're not looking for folks who are all the same. We're looking for people who can bring different perspectives and really strong problem-solving skills to whatever business unit they are joining. So you don't have to be a super energetic person. You just have to, align with what we're trying to do and really demonstrate that you're going to be successful here. And that looks different for everybody in terms of our personality and how we manifest, the work that we're doing. So I would say definitely don't be discouraged to apply for startups just because you're of a certain age. I would actually encourage it, especially if it's a more niche or like senior role, that we really need someone that's more experienced and has done something like this before to kind of come in and problem solve.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think you pretty much said it all. And I would take that, like, not to be scared if you're like, oh, I'm not a young, hungry, or like, I'm not as young as these people, is actually like your age and your experience is your advantage, right? And so seeing anything that you think might be a hindrance, other people might see as an advantage. And that just kind of goes across the board, whether you're young, whether you're older, like whether you've had experience in a startup or not, like whatever you bring to the table is actually to your advantage because you have a unique perspective that other people don't have.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier, right? With the culture fit versus culture gap. So if like you said, workers who have been in the industry or at least been in the working world for, 20, 30, 40 years, these are people with invaluable skills. There are certain things that are awesome that, young people have, like, you have that energy, you have that hunger, you're a lot more willing to be very flexible with things because you're not sure, like, you want to kind of keep proving yourself and you want to make sure that your career is advancing. But people that have more work experience, they have these skills that you cannot learn overnight. They have skills, you are probably very good at collaborating. You're probably very good at project, completing projects and that sort of thing. These are not things that you can learn overnight. I've been sharing a ton of links in the chat thread, and I just want to highlight real quick those for you. So I started with questions on resumes or job hunting. I expanded that into previous chats that we had on pivoting careers, as well as one on ageism in the workforce. So if this is kind of a question or a concern for you, please take advantage of some of those events. They're all free. You can skip through to whatever, you can skip around in case it's not, great for you. But especially when it comes to the job hunting and pivoting, anything with Kelly Kugler or the Alora Collective on our chat, like in our archives, is amazing. So definitely take advantage of those. And I love to hear that Hopin is, looking for that diversity in their candidates, because I feel like a lot of times when you think about diversity and equity and inclusion programs, what usually gets like given like the forefront is with racial or ethnic diversity. And from there, it's more, still people think of like the visible diversities as opposed to something like ageism, like neurodiversity, like diversity of background. So that's really important and really great to hear about Hopin. That's awesome. Okay, so we had another question about like the startup kind of goals and startup practices. This person had asked, since many startups are formed by friends and expand via referrals, is it smart or pointless to ask about DEI goals and practices? So I'm kind of curious if you want to answer this both from a Hopin perspective as well as maybe what you've seen in your experience within startups. Rachel, would you like to lead?
I would say always ask about that initiative. I think everyone should have an answer for it. We're in 2021, right? So I think everyone, can't remember what year it is still, but yeah, I think everyone should have an answer for that. So I think it's always worth asking. I will say, like, in terms of startups, networking is big, right? And so I would say one of the things to look for is look not just in your network, but do you know someone who's more connected? Look in their networks and go through their LinkedIns and see who can they connect you to that you can have a chat with. I remember getting intro to lots of people and just going through my friends' networks and being like, hey, can you introduce me to the VP of talent over here? And they would introduce me and we'd have talks. And so I think just making sure to do that, get your name in front of people, or just straight up, you don't have those connections. Maybe you have a different background is still like, have a little bit of the boldness to feel free to reach out to people and kind of, on LinkedIn say like, hey, I'm very interested in this. And that shows like some drive and passion and that boldness. So I think that's, if you don't know anyone, I think that's my advice on the best way to get in.
How about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And the only thing I'll add too is that having specific questions in mind for the people that you're reaching out to is really helpful. I'm sure that Rachel, I'm sure that you get as many kind of LinkedIn message requests as I get. And what is great is when people say, I really want to know about this, or I really want to ask you about your culture, or I really want to know about that other thing. And that's great, because if you just say, I want to know about Hopin, there's a million different things I could tell you. And so it's best for both of our times if you really tell me, how I can help you. And yeah, so when you're reaching out to people, I would recommend doing that, and definitely ask about DEI everywhere you interview. Absolutely.
Oh yeah, completely. Because I mean, even absent, all of the conversations around social justice and racial justice that have been happening in the last year since, the murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, these are no longer questions that any like responsible organization can really answer with anything like what used to be okay, which was like, no, we don't do that, or what do you mean? So when you're asking these questions, please make sure you ask them, but pay attention to the answer as well as how the answer is delivered. Is this something that they know they need to work on and they're actively engaged in that? Is this something that, yes, they're paying lip service because they're like, oh yeah, like our organization's diverse. We've got, a couple dudes over in sales. And it's like, no. How important is this to you? And I think you're right, y'all, that the other thing to ask about that's kind of smart is, talk about, their hiring practices. Ask them, how heavily referrals weigh in on their decision making. And I absolutely love what you guys were saying about networking. For me, like the big hurdle for me was always like that anxiety bullshit, which was like, well, I don't have anything to offer and you don't know me, and like, why would they do this? And I always try and flip it and think like, well, if somebody were to, LinkedIn message me and ask to be intro to somebody at Power to Fly, would I do it? Well, yeah, everybody likes to feel like useful and like to feel, people love to say yes to requests too. They don't like to say no because it feels weird. So, and like you said, like, all of our amazing Hopin team said, the worst they can say is no. And if somebody asks me for an introduction and I say no, I'm not then running around to all of my friends being like, can you believe this, this guy who asked me for a referral? I don't know him. Like, nobody does that. So even if the worst you get is a no, try someone else. Ask them like, oh, hey, like, can I get introduced to this person? If they say no, be like, oh, that's, I understand. I'm trying to accomplish this. I'm trying to get my foot in the door at such and such. Do you know anyone that that you could connect me with, or that anyone else I could reach out to about this? It never hurts. And we do a lot of networking sessions on Power to Fly, but, it definitely is something that it can be pursued a lot more easily than people think, Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes left in the chat. So if you do have a question you want to make sure we answer, please feel free to put it in the question bucket. I'm looking at the chat features on both the event tab and the stage tab, as well as the Q&A tabs in both of those, or subgroups, or whatever you want to call it. So I'll be keeping my eyes peeled, so please take a look at those, or put your questions in there if you have them. Let's see. Okay, so this person wanted to know, are there any tech roles that are common staple positions in startups? I'm looking into a career change and I want to position myself for success.
Yes, I would say probably your staples are your classic, software engineers, front end, full stack, and back end. Those are going to be like pretty much across the board at every startup, and they're probably hiring a million of them. So I would say that those are probably the top three. What would you say, Brinley? Are there any others that stand out to you?
Definitely. I think those three are huge. And I think the other side of the coin is sales. And what's great about sales is that there's so many different, you can get into sales entry level as a business development representative, as a sales development representative. And then you can work up to an account executive or whatever you want to do. I used to think that sales was really, I don't know. I used to shy away from it. But then during my customer success days, I learned that sales is a skill that you can learn. So definitely these startup companies, especially like SaaS, software companies, they need salespeople to sell their product. So definitely those as well.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. Sales is definitely one of those things you can learn. And there's a lot of doors can be opened even just by saying like, hey, I know I don't have explicit experience in this area, but I have a track record of going into a new situation and hitting the ground running. I know how to, really get brought up to speed and really, learn these new skills quickly. So is there, a way that we could talk about this? And I love highlighting the fact that, like, yes, tech is huge and that's a great place to pivot, but sales is also massive. Most companies, even smaller startups, have some level of sales or customer support that is, a really good way to get your foot in the door as well. So yeah, I love those suggestions. Rachel, did you want to add anything else before we move on?
Yeah, I think those are great. And yeah, it's really just getting your foot in the door. A lot of times startups are growing and moving and changing. And once you kind of get in, it's easy to, transfer your skills within the organization because, they want to keep great employees. So, you have a little more opportunity to grow and learn and, learn new skills. And I think it goes back to what Meg was saying about curiosity being really important and, just diving in and being like, I'm ready to learn new skills. So yeah, I think that's important too.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so that actually leads into one of the other things I wanted to touch on about like kind of feeling like you have to know the right people to get your foot in the door. Do you have any recommendations for ways to find out about open roles at smaller startup companies, or is this something that you kind of do have to know the right people or network with the right people?
So I think it's a little bit of both in the sense that a lot of times roles at these kind of early stage startups will never get posted to the internet because they are very referral heavy. People know folks from their previous companies that they bring in and things like that. But I will say that I think any company that is a company is going to be on LinkedIn. They're going to, post their jobs on Angel List, for example. They're going to partner with platforms like Power to Fly. And then there's also several different like remote work specific job boards out there as well. So when I was job searching in the past, I would always just have a list of all of those kind of online resources that I would scour. And so I don't think it only comes down to knowing somebody, but I think it comes down to just really knowing what you want to go for and using all those online resources to do so. And then I think commonly what I used to do a lot and what I see a lot still today is applying for the role and then going on LinkedIn and finding the hiring manager for that role or finding a recruiter that you think might be working on that role. No promises that they'll take a call with you or that they'll even accept your request, but it just goes to, it's just going that extra step of trying to get your foot in the door and asking good questions to really make it worth their time to engage with you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about, kind of digging in a little deeper on LinkedIn. And I think, depending on where, what your work history is like, where, what industry you're in, what places you've worked at, who you've worked with, even just doing kind of a deep dive on the higher ups at your own current company or past companies and see like, okay, well, this person is into this specific thing and they probably know this other person as well. So see like how far that network reaches. because you can always start with people that you know or people that you feel more comfortable with and try and get the, kind of get the introduction ball moving that way. We also have a really good chat on this, and it comes with a ton of templates of like messages you can send out to get, to get an introduction, to get a referral, to get, and it drills this all down, which for me, I found wonderful because it really demystifies the process and also takes care of that awkward, like, well, what do I say? Like, don't ask to pick someone's brain. Don't ask to sit down for 5 minutes for a cup of coffee. Be upfront with what you're looking for. Lead with a compliment or some kind of interest in that person. Hey, I saw this LinkedIn post you wrote, or I see that you have an interest in blah, 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 and I also do as well. Utilize those things, like kind of treat it like a cocktail party when we still had to do those. If you want to talk to somebody, and especially somebody that you've never met before, you start with trying to find common ground, right? So try and do that with these people to get your connections rolling. It doesn't have to be, 2 degrees of separation. It could be 4 or 5 if it keeps moving along. And if you start off with these things and start asking about, connecting and whatever, it's really easy to make it apparent that you are also willing to help with this, because you might not get what you're looking for in this moment. You might be the connection that someone else needs though. So, kind of keep that in mind about how this is a two-way street. Because you're right, it can feel, especially coming into the startup world and the remote work world from the outside, it can feel like it's a little bit of a club, not a boys club, but it can feel like a little bit of like, well, I didn't go to the right school, or I've never worked with these companies. I don't, whatever. So yeah, that's huge. Okay, so in the last 10 minutes we have, I want to get on, let me check our questions bank. I don't think we have had any more yet. Nope. I want to touch real quick on this part. There we go. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you need to be really proficient in a fully remote startup. So we talked a little bit about some of the applicable skills, as well as some of the some of the tips and tricks for your resume. But is there anything that you kind of need to go in knowing, skill-wise, either hard or soft skills, when you're trying to get into a fully remote startup?
That's a great question. I would say, in terms of, sorry, my brain just ran in 5 directions, but I would say definitely look at the company values. Do they align with your values, right? Do they align with your soft skills? Do they align with your hard skills? Are you going to be successful there, or are you going to want to be there by thinking about really reflecting on, okay, what do I bring to the table and what do they bring to the table as well? And so just kind of going through those in terms of soft skills, I would definitely look at that in their values. But hard skills are pretty basic. I would also say not everyone's going to check a box on a job description. You're not going to check every single box. So I just, again, the not self-rejecting is very big for me, and making sure that that even if it says you have to have 3 master's degrees, like no one's going to check that box, right? So just apply anyway. And
I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, right? When these job recs are written, they are describing a unicorn. They are describing the person they want at the price they want to pay, and it's like your absolute ideals. I mean, people do this when they're thinking about, like, when they're in the process of dating as well. You think about the person that you want, but how often do you really meet, like the Dr. Supermodel who's also really kind and doesn't think he's that great? You know what I mean? Like, these are not things that are really feasible. So I love what Rachel said about, like, not disqualifying yourself and not realizing, like, or kind of focusing on the points of, like, what you lack. I feel like this comes up in a lot of these chats, but it's like, if you are, like, let's say I want to be a lion tamer, and the job rec says that you need experience working with large cats, and you need to be able to perform in front of a crowd, and you need a top hat that's all your own. Okay, I can bring the top hat, and obviously I can perform in front of a crowd, but I've never been in a room with a lion before. Maybe that's not the job I want to apply to. But if out of, like, 5 requirements, you meet 3 of them and the other 2 are not, like, as long as they're not something that you cannot be taught, in this field, like you need to, learn how to breathe underwater to be a scuba diver or something. Like as long as it's not something major, apply anyway. If it's something major, apply anyway and ask if they do, training, or could you get in on the sales side of this organization before you get to switch to lion tamer. These are questions you can ask, and the worst thing that they can say is nothing, because at least if it's no, you know what's going on, but they're never going to tell you anything unless you ask. So seriously, like big, great questions to ask there. So thank you both. Last thing I do want to touch on before we circle back to Hopin is Celeste had asked a question about working on the people side of tech and leaning into development or customer success, and saying that she's coming from a background in higher education. So when it comes to something that you're pivoting from a completely unrelated, seemingly unrelated field, are there any points that people need to include, or things that they need to highlight for a recruiter to make that clear and make that connection?
Yeah, and this is a great question. And I think it goes back to really taking the time to reflect on the skills that you've built up over your career in higher education. And I say take the time to do it because it doesn't come easy to me. Like I think about what am I learning, and I can't rattle them off. It does really take some reflection. So that's the first thing I would say. And I think the great thing about trying to pivot into the people side of tech is precisely it requires a lot more soft skills than it does hard skills. And I'm sure that with a career in higher education, you have a lot of those soft skills. You just need to figure out how you can best market those and actually articulate them. So I think reflecting on what those are, comparing them to the job description that you are interested in, and really making a case for yourself because you have those skills. I think that's kind of what it's all about, and really making those parallels clear in your resume and your cover letter.
I agree. Spelling out the fact that all of my past experiences in education, but I am looking to pivot to blank. And I know sometimes that can feel really weird to call out on LinkedIn, especially if maybe you don't want to tip your hand that you are looking to change. But that's one of the things I love to highlight about Power to Fly that I don't think a lot of people realize is your profile on powertofly.com is only visible to internal Power to Fly admins and then the hiring teams from the various companies that we work with. So it's not like, I can go in and look at Brinley's profile, or I can go in and do a search for Rachel's profile. It's, these are things that it's the best, I feel like the best of both worlds between sharing your resume with someone versus broadcasting to the rest of, the world, I'm looking to move. So definitely take advantage of that fact, because there's a lot of things that a lot of information and a lot of the storytelling that you can do on your Power to Fly page that you might not feel comfortable doing on LinkedIn because of who else might see it. So yeah, all right, before we wrap up, I just want to go back, Rachel, if you want to share your screen again, we can hit some of those questions, because these are always really interesting to me. So we had asked Brinley and Rachel a couple questions prior to today's session about Hopin. So that's what you're seeing on your screen right now. Now, y'all said that you described the company culture as energetic and collaborative, as well as your favorite part about working at Hopin was the ability to create and learn new things. Would y'all like to expand on that favorite part subject? Because I'm always really interested to see what people love about the company and what keeps them there.
Yeah, I would say that, just when you're at a startup, obviously the people are the best thing, but I would say that just when you're working in an environment where things are getting built and you're kind of having the opportunity to be curious and to say, hey, how could we do this better? How could we do that better? And having those new ideas is really great. And you can be very collaborative with people and sit around and make sure that, I might not have the best ideas, but if Brinley and I meet, we come up with a super mega idea that's even better. And so just kind of having that ability to create and put a stamp on something and make it your own and just being able to learn from other people as well, I think is really my favorite part.
Wonderful. Brinley, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
Sure. Yeah. I again completely agree with Rachel. And I think what's particularly special about it at Hopin, and actually in the startup world in general, you are more than likely going to have opportunities to contribute to things that are outside the scope of your role. And that's really exciting to me personally, getting involved in projects on the other side of the business or helping your manager with a sub project that's relevant to your team. Getting involved in other things and having that kind of dynamic work environment, I think goes back to the ability to create and just constantly be learning. And I think that's definitely one of my favorite things about Hopin.
That's so great. All right, so the next line talks about your top tips for someone who's interviewing. And we talked a lot about never self-rejecting. Can we talk a little bit more about the idea of like interviewing back and being transparent? Because I feel like it's not something that we talk about often, about the idea that you are interviewing this company just as much as they are interviewing you. And especially with the idea of being transparent, it can feel really difficult to figure out where to draw that line between being transparent and kind of like dumping your purse out on the desk in front of these people. So do either of you have any tips on maybe how to walk that line of transparency?
I can jump in on this. I think it's definitely a learned skill. I think it's like you said, Meg, it's hard to do. And because for those of us that identify as women, we're also conditioned to not ask for things and ask for what we deserve. So it's definitely, it's like I said, it's hard. But I think, like I was saying earlier, for me at least, just my personal recruiting philosophy, I want to get to know you as a person. I want to suss out your skills, see if you could be a good match for our company. And I really want you to kind of bring your full self to that process. And I don't want to be surprised later when I am maybe thinking about, giving you an offer and I'm surprised that we're not aligned, for example. I think just really not necessarily dumping your purse out completely, but being prepared with what is your bottom line, doing your research, kind of understanding what it is that the market can offer, and also being transparent with things like your timeline. When are you looking to actually start a new role? All of those things are just really important for me as a recruiter. And I really just value that transparency. So I hope that that's helpful. I was a little rambly, but yeah.
No, I completely get you. To come to it with that idea of like, is this something that I would be a little bit embarrassed to hear from someone else, like, from a complete stranger? Is this something that I'm comfortable sharing? I feel like a lot of times we overshare in interviews because we're worried about maybe not getting our point across accurately, or trying to fill that silence that kind of feels like it hangs in the air when some questions are asked. But it's completely fine to just say, here's what I'm comfortable sharing with you about this, or that's not really a subject that I'd like to discuss right now, especially when it comes to some like more personal kinds of things, like obviously above the line of what you can ask in a job interview legally. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a hard line to walk, but with practice, it's one that can feel a lot more comfortable. All right, so I see we are at time. I'm so sorry, y'all. If you want to jump to the next slide, we can talk real quick about some of the key roles that you're highlighting at Hopin. I've shared in the chat on both the event and the stage sections, where you can check out Hopin's company page. Are there any jobs on here that are, especially important to y'all to fill quickly, or something that, is a particularly difficult role to find your great applicant in?
Yeah, so I was talking about sales earlier. We're definitely ramping up our sales org. It's an exciting time to be at Hopin in sales. We've just made some acquisitions. We're really like revamping our entire value proposition. So I think sales is a big one. And I think, Rachel, as you said earlier, definitely the tech side, engineers, we have a lot of work to do to continue to maintain this great product. So those are the two that I would call out.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have over 100 roles right now that are open, and a lot of those roles, when you see one job title, there's more people that we're actually hiring than one single person. So if you see account executive, for example, we're not hiring just one, we're hiring plenty of them. So yeah, we have lots of roles open, and yeah, just kind of across the board.
Great. Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you for joining us today. It's never just the hour for the event. There's a lot of prep work that goes into this. So I just want to say a big thank you to both of you for sitting down with us. It's really been amazing both to reconnect with Brinley as well as get to know more about you, Rachel, as well as Hopin as an org. So I'm really, really excited for this partnership.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Meg, and thanks everyone.
You're welcome. Huge thank you to our attendees as well. Great questions submitted before today's event and some amazing ones during. So thank you to all of you. Don't forget to check out Hopin's company page, unpoweredtofly.com. I've also shared a link to our career page where you can check out a bunch of our upcoming events. We're going to have another mini summit in September, but before then we have a ton of great chats happening the rest of this week, next week. There's a lot of great stuff happening. So hopefully we'll see many more of you on upcoming Power to Fly events, and hopefully Hopin will be seeing some great applications from you all as well. I hope the rest of you, have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we hope to see you soon. Bye.